Well, welcome back to Southern Voices. I'm Lauren Kari, and this is the series where I get to sit down with advocates, elected officials, and people doing the day-to-day work of where that work is the hardest to do. Today, I'm in conversation with Florida State Representative Rita Harris, who represents District 44 in Orlando. Representative Harris has called Central Florida home for almost 25 years. Before running for office, she spent over a decade organizing at the grassroots level, advocating for public education, environmental protection, affordable housing, and reproductive rights. As vice chair of the Orange County Democratic Party, she helped lead voter engagement efforts and empower residents to make their voices heard in government. Her path to Tallahassee was shaped by lived experience. She is a former stand-up comic, content writer, and self-described just a mom, and she brings humor, grit, and authenticity to her work in Tallahassee. Representative Harris was elected to the Florida House in 2022 and is one of 34 Democrats in a chamber where Republicans hold a supermajority of 86 seats. She has filed bills on paid paternal leave, breast cancer screening, LGBTQ plus protections, and public health. And she's doing this work in one of the most restrictive reproductive health policy environments in the country. So we're recording this ahead of Florida's special session, which reconvenes April 28th. And we have a lot to get through today. So Representative Harris, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this conversation.
Absolutely. So I know I gave a really high level outline for your bio and your story, but I would love for you to, in your own words, talk about what brought you to this work. I know you were elected in 2022, but was there anything specific or an issue that really made you decide to run?
Yeah, there were several, but I will say that the main one at the time was access to reproductive health care. In the session previous, Florida had passed the 15-week abortion ban, and there was talk that they were going to go even further with the restriction. And we also had looming ahead of us, the eventual fall of Roe v. Wade. As someone who started out at Planned Parenthood as a volunteer in high school, and as someone who has a daughter who's of reproductive age, it really worried me and scared me, and I wanted to ensure that there was somebody up in the Florida House that would be fighting for and being a very vocal advocate for, the right to reproductive health care.
Yeah. Yeah, you were elected right as Dobbs was coming out and, was going to be released. So yeah, that was definitely a conspicuous time. And I'm grateful that you decided to take action in a more formal way with power and the ability to represent a lot of what people actually want in this state.
Right.
And for those individuals who are watching this video, I really hope that they understand the structure that you're working inside. Before we get to the bills and the legislation, you are one of 34 Democrats in an 86-seat Republican chamber. What does this actually mean to legislate from that position, and what can you do?
So it is what is referred to as a super minority. It can be incredibly difficult. One of the things, because we are in a super minority, is that we simply don't have enough votes as Democrats to stop legislation. So it requires us to be incredibly creative. It requires us to rely on as many tools as we can to stop harm. And that is something that we've been able to do. We've been able to, in some cases, stop legislation from passing or reduce the harm of legislation, though not always are we able to do that because of the fact that we are so, small in number. But we fight. We are a scrappy bunch, and though small, we are powerful and mighty.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I'm going to kind of touch into this later, but when we talk about Florida, I think a lot of people like to write off the state as like this is not only Republican, but this is MAGA. And what I hope people really understand is the level of gerrymandering and that the state has faced, and that there are people at the state courthouse in Tallahassee working to actually get legislation passed and voted on that represent what the people actually want. So I really hope viewers take that away. Also speaking to being a super minority, recently, Florida has been framed, like I said, as this really reliably red state for several cycles now. But in the last few months, like I want to say March, last month, we have seen a string of Democrat wins across the state that are worth naming out loud. Just to briefly run through them. Brian Nathan flipped Florida State District 14. Emily Gregory won Florida House District 87. Thompson won the mayoral in Boca Raton. Keith Givens, City Council. Jennifer Webb, Gulfport City Council. And then we have Eileen Higgins, who was elected mayor of Miami, the first woman and the first Democrat to hold that office in nearly 30 years. These are all different levels of the political environment. Not all the same race, but they span these different parts of office. What is your read on what these wins are signaling in the state?
It's signaling that all is not lost in Florida, that there are still, first of all, there are still Democratic voters here. They deserve to have a voice and they want their voice heard. And you're right, we are heavily gerrymandered, and that has caused a lot of disenfranchisement. It has caused some apathy in voter turnout. But people are really frustrated right now. They're frustrated with the entire state of the country and what's happening. They're also really frustrated that our state has been under the control of one party for the last 30 years, and things are not getting better. And in fact, if you look at Florida versus the rest of the country, everything always impacts us harder. Our gas prices are usually higher. When inflation hits, we feel it particularly harder. So overall, I think what we're seeing is even people who may not identify themselves as Democrats are coming out to support Democrats because they're really ready for something new. And it's an opportunity for Democrats to really show what we're made of and really present the vision of Florida that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you are out in your community, out in with your constituents. You do and attend so many different local events, which as a representative, I absolutely applaud that, that work that you do, getting to know what they're saying. And I'm sure the frustration is very loud. Orlando, gets hit very hard. They have a lot of Orlando, and the state of Florida is leading in immigrant populations. And so Florida is also a state that has yet to expand Medicaid. And so we are expected to be, if not the most impacted, one of the top impacted states for the One Big Beautiful Bill that's going to be in effect this year. So I definitely appreciate you getting the feedback and understanding that this isn't just a Democrat issue. A lot of people in the state are, really fed up with the lack of progress that we're seeing. Does this string of wins change perhaps the morale or the strategy inside the House, or within how you guys are thinking about legislation? Or is it more so of we're going to wait and see what happens more so at the end of this year in November?
It has definitely improved morale. Even not even just among those in the caucus, but just among, volunteers and grassroots supporters, caucus and club members, people who have really stuck in there and have continued to do the work despite disappointing losses, have continued to knock doors, have continued to make phone calls. They start to feel like, well, maybe it was all for nothing, but then they see this and it's like, okay, there's an opportunity. As far as like what we're doing, I feel like we've always been, filing really good legislation.
Yeah.
I hopefully we're doing a better job at highlighting that. We're only given 7 bill slots, but we all choose to file bills that we know won't pass because of the environment that we're in, but we feel are important. And
Yeah.
this year, the caucus had an affordability agenda, and I think they did a really good job of getting it out there so people could see that if Democrats were in charge, this might be more of what they would see, and that includes some relief for property insurance and also some relief for home buyers. And, people have a really tough time purchasing a home in this state, and we want to give people something that they feel like they're working so hard for. We want to make it easy for them to have that dream, the American dream of owning a home and calling a place their own.
Yeah, and I'm grateful that you highlighted the affordability hurdles in this state because we are seeing, I've been seeing the headlines on my algorithm just highlighting how Florida now has one of the highest rents in the country. Homeownership is now out of reach for quite a few people in this state. And then when you also include insurance, a lot of people now just can't even actively get because of climate change and natural disasters that we have. I think it really, no pun intended, creates a little bit of that perfect storm of people wanting some help and support at the state level and really not having that. So I'm grateful that you're highlighting that affordability and to be on record, candidly to give people a look behind, like, quote unquote, how the sausage is made, being on record that your representative is there trying to vote in your interests, trying to vote with you. So I'm really grateful for the work that you do despite the odds, and getting people on roll call for this. And you are up for re-election in November. And I would love to know, does this pattern of wins change how you're thinking about your own race?
Well, fortunately, I have always represented a pretty solidly Democratic leaning district. There are quite a few NPAs, but they historically tend to vote with the Democratic Party. So I have always just continued to just do what I do, which is just advocate for my community. And I've not really had to change or modify that any way. I can tell you though that the voices at home are getting louder, and now when I'm out and about, just at community events, people will ping me and say, well, how do I get involved, not just with my campaign, but also just more broadly, how do I get involved with either the Democratic Party or an organization? And so what I'm seeing more of in my own district is people who have been voting and who have been supporting, but now are looking to do that next step. What else can I do? And I think that really speaks to those wins that we experience and sort of giving everybody that little moral boost that, you can make a difference. And for those of us that have been saying that, it really is nice to see that, people are starting to feel that, because it's the hardest thing in a lot of this is just having optimism and keeping up that mental fortitude and the energy. And so this has really helped a lot of people, realize like they can do something, and they're wanting to get back out into it or start to do it for the very first time, which is wonderful. I always love seeing that.
Absolutely. Democracy is a active sport. You can't, it's not passive. You've got to be active in it. And really, that point is exactly why I started this series and love having you here, because there are many people in this state, in this region, who want to take action and they don't know how. They don't know where to start. They don't know who is aligned with them on a path forward into more equity. And I think giving time and space to people in different spaces who are in states who are advocating for these gives them the confidence to, one, either reach out to duplicate what these individuals are doing, or in your case, to get more involved with their representative, their local representative, not just at the state capitol in DC, or, wherever. Um, have you noticed an increase in constituent involvement with your office as it pertains to phone calls or communication?
Yeah, we have seen an increase in advocacy on all topics, from everything to affordability, as well as just what I mean. People will reach out to our office and also advocate because they're frustrated with what's happening in Washington. Sometimes they see somebody and they say that's my elected official, and they will reach out. So we even hear about some of the frustrations that people have with what's happening in Washington. But we definitely are seeing more advocacy, and I really honestly appreciate that as well. I love when our communities are engaged. An engaged community is a community that's plugged in, that wants to know what's happening, that wants to keep up on what's going on, and they want to be educated. They want to know why things are passing, why they're not passing, and so I always enjoy the opportunity to talk and chat with my constituents.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that end, I'd like to also plug, in the state of Florida, there are tally days, where people in advocacy groups will coordinate specific days. I know Equity Florida will have specific days at the courthouse, and they will coordinate buses from around the state so people can show up and have representation at the state house. I know Planned Parenthood coordinates 2 days advocacy, and then also are outside the state capitol building as well. So there are ways for you to get involved in your specific area of focus. Do you have any suggestion for people who are like, okay, I want to take action, I want to be empowered. I saw Representative Harris talk about things that I strongly believe in. Is there anything that maybe could help bridge that gap between knowing I want to get involved and perhaps taking some action?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the organizations that you mentioned. I know find something that especially, ignites your passion. I think we all care about a lot of things at once, but we all have that one thing that really drives us. And I say, find an organization that deals with advocacy in that lane, or find a constituency group within the party. There's a lot of caucuses and clubs, and just get involved. And I always tell people, whether it's an hour a month or an hour a week, if you're not doing anything right now, you're now doing an hour. If everybody who had an hour a month did an hour of advocacy, it would make a huge difference. And I feel that sometimes also people feel like if I'm not doing everything, if I'm not everywhere doing all things at once, then I'm not doing anything. And that's not true either. It's okay to budget your time and say, I can give 2 hours a month and this is what I'm going to do. And if that's all you can do, that's wonderful. That is plenty. That is more than we can ask of anybody. So I always encourage people to do what they can, to not overextend themselves, to find a constituency group that really speaks to them, or excuse me, a organization that really speaks to them. And I also encourage people. It's hard to get to Tallahassee, and I know this. If they can't go up there, that they can watch everything that's going on the floridachannel.org. There is also a TV channel, but it's different to the different markets. I always kind of plug them through the website, because then they can find, what if they want to watch it on TV. Most people stream it, and it's a way for you to watch all the committee hearings, both in the House and the Senate, and our floor sessions and everything. And also to go to flhouse.gov, where they can literally follow bills. They can see where they're assigned. They can see if they've passed, who voted, and how they voted. I feel like you don't have to go up to it. Is obviously, I've gone up to Tallahassee, and I did tally days before I was elected, back when I was an advocate myself. And while it's fun, you don't have to do it if you can't. There are still ways to engage with the process and see what's happening without going up there.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you underscoring we do care about a lot of things. We care about the protection of our immigrant neighbors and, ICE. We care about the wildfires that are going through the majority of our state right now. Like, we care
Right.
about so many things right now, but you are incredibly right with focus on the main thing that you are most passionate about and focus on that. That is the most sustainable way to take action. And times are tough for a lot of people, but if you can commit an hour a month, I love that you said that. I'm probably going to adopt that myself. If you can take an hour a month, it really does make change. I know a lot of people, myself included, have that all or nothing mentality where it's like, this has to be my next full-time job. That's not the
Mhm.
case. If you take part of your weekend or part of a day, whatever, phone banking, what have you, it really does add up and it really makes a difference. And I'm grateful to hear that you're hearing more from your constituents, even if it's feedback about the federal level. I know sometimes in the state of Florida, it's a little bit tricky for someone to break through in those federal offices.
Right.
So having a representative like you, I'm sure, is some level of comfort for your constituents. I'd love to now pivot and talk a little bit more about where things stand in the legislature right now. There is a lot happening, and I
Right.
really want to make sure that listeners have kind of a full picture before we get into the substance of your work and your bills. Florida's regular 60-day session ended without a budget. So we're originally going to have, I believe, the special session start on the 20th, and that was delayed until the 28th. So I would love for you to kind of give a landscape context of, perhaps why a budget wasn't able to be passed, and, kind of what this special session looks to do.
So this is the second session in a row where we have not come in for a landing in time for the end of session on the budget. And a lot of that has to do with some, you know, tension between the executive, the governor, and the legislature, the president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House, and their sort of inner tension that's happening between all of them. And I think that's more of the same this session as well. And what I'm hearing is the president is more aligned with the governor, but the Speaker of the House is not, and so they're just really having a difficult time coming to an agreement. And the budget on the House side and the Senate side have to align in order to be passed. So until they get into that alignment and they agree, we are going to be sitting it out. And for those of us who, especially who are in the minority party, but for those of us who are not leadership, we have very little information and influence over the whole process. It is really something that happens behind the scenes. And so often we are asking, people that we think might know, like, have you heard anything? Do you know what's happening? So it's a frustrating experience to be a part of, because we really should have landed the plane already and we haven't. And there's very little we have the power to do to get that done as far as individual members.
Yeah, and I please correct me if I'm misspeaking here, but passing a budget is the only constitutional mandatory thing that the state Congress does. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. And it's also good to note that July 1st is the start of our fiscal year. So we're coming up to a deadline as well. And you have to lay the budget on the table and it has to sit for 72 hours before we can vote on it. So we've got to get that budget in by, we would like to see it sooner rather than later, but we have that deadline at the end of June that we really need to get a look at it, be able to debate it, ask questions about it, and then vote on it.
Yeah, and I feel like that is really going to come faster. June, July is going to be here before we know it. So absolutely.
Right.
Um, For also those who aren't as plugged in into the state of Florida, we are currently also looking for a governor electoral campaign this fall. The current governor is stepping down and will not, to my knowledge, not rerunning. Um, and so, if you want to get involved with that as well, there have been a lot of orders from the governor's office that have directly kind of tied up a lot of legislation. I know last year, if memory serves me, there was a closed door special session before you all went to tally. A lot of state sessions are running together in my mind, but there's a lot of power in the governor's office, and there is a new election for that seat going to be here in November. So this is a massive year for our state. And I know I bring up the governor particularly because there's been some commentary around a mid-cycle redistricting plan. Could you maybe shine some light on why that's also being put on the itinerary and even being circulated around when we still have yet to pass a budget?
Right. So I think that last sentence, I think, really kind of expresses the frustration that, not only those of us in the legislature are dealing with, but, our constituents and our communities are saying, why is this happening when the budget has not even been passed? But, we do know that the president made a statement a few months back, I think it was last year, that, he wanted to see redistricting in his favor. Now, Florida does have a fair districts amendment. It was voted on, it was brought to the people, and it passed overwhelmingly. As you know, there's a 60% threshold for an amendment to be passed, and it went beyond that. So it's bipartisan that people want to see districts drawn, to be fair, and that elected officials, and I know this is, sort of like the niche line that's being quoted, but it's true. Elected officials shouldn't choose their voters. Voters should absolutely be able to choose their elected officials. So I think there's a lot of frustration around the fact that, we have this amendment, and it's constitutional. It's in the Florida Constitution, and that we should be abiding by it. And we should then wait until after the census in 2030, and then go through the process of drawing the new maps the way it's supposed to be done, the constitutionally and fair district way.
Yeah, you beat me to that amendment. I'm grateful that you brought that up because, we do have regulation to stand on as precedent for this. And we just went through redistricting after the 2020 census. So it is obviously, I think the motivation for this is a lot more obvious versus more of wanting to accurately reflect constituents. So for, a voter in District 44 or even anywhere in Florida, what does it mean concretely if these maps go through? How would the landscape change?
Yeah, so I also want to point out, and I'll answer that question, that the maps that are currently in place were fought over. That the governor went to court to defend those maps, and so he obviously, those were his maps, and so the fact that we're changing them halfway through is pretty telling as well. I will say that on the the county level, the state level, who your state representative is, who your state senator is, your county commissioners, that won't be affected by the redistricting. It will impact who your congressperson is. And currently right now, the makeup of our congressional delegation is for Democrats, there are 8. And they are talking about possibly getting that down to 3. So I've not seen the maps. I don't know what they look like. I've not had the opportunity to review them, and I'm not sure if we're even going to be discussing them in this upcoming session. But it could have huge implications on who is representing you and what your district looks like, and if it's a district that's packed with people, or if it's a district that's been cracked up a little bit and the vote's been diluted. So it's really something to watch, and that's why I always plug the floridachannel.org. That's definitely the space to watch what's going to happen in when it comes to the redistricting.
Absolutely. And I can tell you the district that I live in is massive. It is obscene. It is massive. I know that you mentioned, following what's happening on the website, but what else can constituents do between now and April 8th? Should they wait until April 28th rather, to make their voice heard? Are there certain strategies that you recommend?
Right. I don't know what strategies. I know there are groups out there who are strategizing around this. I will say that I think it's important to contact your representative, your congressional representative, and ask them to contact your state reps, and reach out. And there have been some congressional representatives who have been doing that. I think it's really important for the congressional delegation to hear from their constituents regarding how they feel about what could happen and what it could mean. And the fact is we are already in 2026. We are in April, almost May of 2026. As you said, we're going to come up in a census in a few years, and new maps are going to be drawn around based on population, based on community, the way that maps should be drawn. And so, I think really just impart on people that there's a process for doing this already in place, and we should just continue to use that process. We don't need to do it in the middle of a cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. The mid cycle is what's thrown me off as well, let alone the lack of, going against precedent. So that's kind of an update of where we are. You'll be headed to the Capitol on Monday with your peers and colleagues in the House and Senate.
Right.
I would love to turn now to the work that you're doing with reproductive and maternal health work with legislation. We can kind of start looking there at bills. You spoke about how you were involved in reproductive advocacy and reproductive work well before Dobbs overturned Roe v. Wade. So no surprise there that you are a very big advocate for getting people medical care, getting them access to the care that they want and need. And for that, I'm incredibly grateful that you bring those bills up in committee and subcommittees, understanding what you are up against. It's so important to just have these bills there, showing that there are people fighting and making efforts. I would love to just briefly run by some of the three that I've noticed, and that was paid parental leave, House Bill 825, and that would give individuals, Floridian state employees, up to 12 weeks of fully paid leave after having a child or adopting a child. House Bill 137, which you co-sponsored, covering mammograms and supplemental breast cancer screenings. And then also House Bill 63 rather, that you co-sponsored with Representative Skidmore with pregnancy support and wellness services, and that's crisis pregnancy centers. All of these bills unfortunately died. In a supermajority environment, what is your purpose of filing this legislation that you know is unlikely to pass?
So the purpose is to show our communities what it could be like if we had even just a little bit of the ability to get the bills that we file onto an agenda. It's also a tool to educate the community. There are a lot of people in the community who don't know, for instance, that state dollars do go to crisis pregnancy centers that don't have the same type of requirements that actual medical providers are required to have, but often sort of present themselves as a situation where there's a medical provider. They often don't have to have technicians that are licensed, and so it sort of raises the message as well that these things are happening. We know people are incredibly busy. We know that politics is hard to follow. It can be very complicated and difficult to understand. And so filing these bills gives us an opportunity to discuss the things that are happening in the state while also showing people what we believe in.
Yeah.
The paid leave one is very personal to me. My husband lost his job right as I gave birth to our child because he was a temporary worker, and I had a C-section, and he was out of work as we were having our first child. It was incredibly stressful, and so we just love to show people that if we had a little bit of opportunity, these are some of the policies that we would be putting forth instead of sort of what they've been seeing, which is a lot of the culture war type of issues and things that haven't really been helpful, but have actually been really harmful to so many communities here.
Yeah, no, I'm grateful that you're bringing up crisis pregnancy centers. I strategize and volunteer with Reclaim Choice Florida, and that mission is aimed at just giving people education around crisis pregnancy centers. I believe we've seen millions of dollars, millions of state dollars funneled to these crisis pregnancy centers. And a lot of the way that these institutions are funded are very hidden on purpose, unfortunately. So I'm grateful for your work with Rep Skidmore on at least getting bills out there to bring awareness to this issue. But you're right, I see other states such as Massachusetts where they do have a paid parental leave at the state level of 12 weeks. And 12 weeks sounds like an arbitrary number, but for people who aren't as plugged in with the research, that's generally the gold standard of giving mom and baby the best kind of head start, the best possibility for giving them a good quality of life. So the 12 weeks is kind of that gold standard for the amount of time that people should be getting after adoption or after a pregnancy. And so, when these bills die in committee, do they stay dead? This is a little bit of a civics kind of class question, but does it stay dead, or what does the path forward look like for any of these bills?
So yeah, unfortunately, if we get to the end of session and they haven't been heard on at least one committee, they are effectively dead in the process. And so what happens is we wait till the next session and we discuss it. For myself, our team sits down and we talk about what strategically we want to file, what message we want to send. And then we refile it again. And then there are people who file the same bill through all 8 of their terms in office. That it never passes, but for them, it is something that they really feel powerfully about, and they want to run the bill each and every time, knowing that it won't go anywhere because they feel like it should be passed. And I think we see that there are people who have been now since 2014 running a Medicaid expansion bill. It has not been passed in our state, but they still run it because it's a discussion that needs to be had. We should be expanding Medicaid. And if it's not going to be expanded, then we're at least going to force a discussion about it by filing it.
Yeah, and I've personally seen, just with my advocacy work, I've been getting a lot more traction in a lot more outreach materials about signing on, getting more signatures to bring up the conversation of Medicaid expansion in the state of Florida. So that's definitely something that comes about every cycle. A lot of times the priorities in conversation shift what actually gets to be voted on or what gets heard and all that kind of stuff. Again, this is a little bit of a civics-minded question. Your bill regarding paid parental leave, HB 825, it died in Government Operations Subcommittee. Can you speak to what that means procedurally and who gets to make that call?
So it means that it was referenced to several committees, and had it moved, it would have been heard in those committees, but it was never even put on the agenda. Usually the leadership, the House leadership gets to decide. So the speaker, and then there are silo chairs of each of the different silos for the committees. So there's a healthcare committee, there's an education committee. So what happens is the chair decides they don't want to put it on an agenda, and it doesn't get on an agenda, and it's never heard. It's never presented. Nobody gets to hear about it, and nobody gets to vote on it. And so it just sort of dies. And it's up to us as those who have filed the bill to sort of keep it in the forefront of the conversation by, doing events around it, a press conference, a roundtable, so that we can continue the discussion around it. And paid leave is a big one for me. It's really important, and it would start out with just the state workers. It wouldn't put any pressure right now on any private businesses or private industry. But it's definitely something that's needed, as people are really finding it very difficult right now to afford, spending time with their families. Like you said, we want to make sure that parents and newborns or children that they have, babies they've adopted, have that time to bond. It's the most important relationship in your life, and we want to be able to make sure that they have what they need to get it started on the right foot.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things that can decrease maternal mortality the most efficient, is
Hmm.
allowing that time off. It allows birthing people to recover adequately. So I'm grateful
Right.
for the bills that you bring up, that your office still, keeps at the forefront and keeps co-sponsoring to bring up, because I think a lot of the things that we saw with Amendment 4, the majority of Floridians support the bills that you're bringing forward. But the chair really does have so much power, a lot more than I know the average person perhaps could understand. Um, I would love to talk about a few bills that you created that actually, I believe are now going into effect later in this year. Um, their public health background, and my background is in public health. That's how I've got started. I have an MPH, and a lot of my work has included the state departments and population level outcomes. So seeing these bills were, I was excited about these. I would love for you to talk about Gage's law, um,
Hmm.
and why you wanted to bring that on, and why you're passionate about that.
So Gage's law actually came to me by a mom, a community member who had, one of the most heartbreaking experiences I think any parent has to go through, and that's she lost her child to fentanyl poisoning. And I call it fentanyl poisoning because the reality was that, what he took, he did not think it was fentanyl. It wasn't presented to him as fentanyl. And we are seeing, unfortunately, an increase in that, especially with young people, especially on college campuses. Things like Xanax are actually not Xanax, they are fentanyl. And so this bill now mandates that, there are testing to ensure that you are tested for fentanyl poisoning if you come in for a suspected overdose. And we want to ensure that if you're overdosing, there are different ways to treat different types of overdoses, and we want to make sure that if you're experiencing an overdose, you're being treated the right way. And you might not always know that you've taken a drug. You might not have known that you've taken it. So now medical personnel will have to be required to test for it. And we worked really closely with hospitals. We worked really closely with medical providers. We really wanted to make sure everyone was on board with this bill. It was really important to get it right.
That's just incredible, what you're doing, seeing the problem, knowing that there are policy and ways where we can get people together and on board to take tangible action so that we decrease fentanyl overdose and poisoning going forward. And I
Right.
believe in the bill reasoning, you mentioned something about, like, with the CDC mentioning how Florida ranks with total drug related deaths. Can you speak about that, and where we're at? Because that was a shock to me.
Yes. So Florida is in a unique position where we are, very easy to get into. And we're also dealing with a lot. And to be truthful, as I mentioned earlier, everything that impacts the country impacts Florida even more. And so we're just seeing overall use increasing. And unfortunately, that also means use of, things like fentanyl. But in a lot of cases, like I said, people are not even taking what they think is fentanyl. They think they're taking a Xanax. It's like kids who are stressed out over their finals. And like I always encourage people to actually go to a mental health professional. But we also understand that, kids don't always do that. And also access to healthcare in general, especially in this state, is abysmal. And so people sometimes will do things that are not, the best for them, but it should not be something that is a death sentence. And so, we want to ensure, and on the opposite end of it, we're working to fund an organization that sends out test strips, that gets test strips out into the public so that people can test drugs to see if there's fentanyl in it. So on one hand, we're trying to make sure people's lives are saved if they are poisoned with fentanyl, and on the other hand, we're trying to prevent that poisoning from happening in the first place. And because it's really happening to a lot of our young people, overwhelmingly.
Yeah, and it is an incredible, efficient, and studied way of decreasing fentanyl deaths and fentanyl hospitalizations as well. Those two ways that you just mentioned. And I know, Florida being the second highest total drug related deaths in the country, that blew my mind. I
Right.
don't always think of it like that, but, so it just goes to show how critical getting this bill passed really was. Can you speak about the process of, getting it through committee, getting it through voted on in the House, getting it a Senate counterpart? Would you be able to, kind of speak on the backstory of this bill?
Of course, yeah. So when, as I said, the mom came to me and talked to me and asked me if I would run the bill, and I said I was very honored to. And then we worked to find a Senate sponsor. Senator Polsky had previously passed some legislation that was sort of in the silo of dealing with fentanyl, and so she seemed like a natural choice to approach. She was very, very reciprocative. She said, I would love to do this. And then we got to work. I will say that for bills like this, it really kind of lined up with what the governor was also trying to sort of message at the time. So there are times that you file really good bills that make so much sense, and they're not even overarching, reformative type of policy. They're just really good bills that would change people's lives, but it doesn't go anywhere. It's the stars. When you're in the super minority, the stars have to line up, and the stars lined up. And so this was something that the governor was also sort of going on a speaking tour regarding, and so we were able to get it passed. We also did. She had spoke to another representative about the bill, and he's a Republican in the Orange County delegation. And I had told her, if it will help to get the bill passed, to bring him on as a co-prime sponsor, I am happy to do that. So we did. We brought him on. And he was great. He worked really hard to get this bill passed as well, and we were able to see all the fruits of everybody's labor, from the mom who something horrible happened to her son, and she said, I don't want this to happen to anybody else, to it passing on the House floor and the Senate floor on the same day while she got to watch, which was really special for me to see her be able to watch that pass in both houses at the same day. So sometimes it's just, like I said, sometimes I'm not going to say it's luck because we worked hard, but it was lucky in that moment because the governor was also talking about fentanyl, and therefore they were willing to say, okay, this is a bill that we can sort of keep going along with and see it get heard on committees. But we worked really hard to make sure that happened.
I think what I also loved, not in addition to her getting to see that bill become law, and I believe it goes in effect this year, July.
It went in effect last year.
Okay, got it.
It was passed last session, so it's in effect now.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you so much for that clarification. But also, you talking about the bipartisanship. I rarely hear that at the state level, but when I do, I'm like, that's the best side of politics. That's everyone working together to make actual change that's going to, save and improve lives. The other bill that is still within that public health, lens is the anaphylaxis bill. Can you speak about what it aims to do and what it will be doing, and why you wanted to platform this bill?
That was another bill that a parent came to me and said, I had this experience, and I think this, this needs to change. And so, there are requirements during school hours, but for before and after school programs, there weren't a set of standard requirements for every school district regarding who is on campus, who knows how to administer an EpiPen. And so now there are requirements during before and after school programs as well, which just really opens up access to these before and after school programs to kids who may have a severe allergy. And we just want to make sure that they're able to enjoy all the activities that their friends do. And that also went into effect last year. And again, I just can't reiterate more how loving something, being passionate about it, going to an elected official, you could literally be the reason why a law is passed. It was two moms who had different experiences with their kids who came and advocated an elected official, and we were able to do it. Now, with the anaphylaxis bill, it was filed previously. The Gage's law passed the first time it was filed, which is very rare, but the anaphylaxis bill was filed the session previously, and we worked with committee staff on some of the language and to get it to a place where we could get the support of all of the committee chairs so that it would be heard on committee and it would be passed. But we were willing to do that work because we really believed in it, and I'm really grateful for both of these moms for entrusting me with these pieces of legislation, because they both came from the heart. And I think that's something I really love to talk about as well, because people don't realize the impact they can have. You don't have to be elected in order to pass legislation. Two moms in Central Florida did it.
Yeah. Yeah, it just goes to show what happens when you can kind of transmute that grief and say, I'm going to do something about it. Those are really, unfortunately, sad situations and crisis. I would love to know too if there's, bills with upstream prevention work. We've talked about paid parental leave and things like that. And more so general, perhaps not specific bills, but is that a conversation that legislators across the aisle are willing to have with you? I know these two specifically were born out of crisis.
Right.
When we start anticipating more of the needs or more of what we're seeing maybe from advocacy efforts and things like that, do you see that perhaps your counterparts are more willing to have these conversations?
It depends. I feel like it depends on the environment. It depends on the sort of the conversation statewide, and also the conversation happening, I think, on the federal level. And sometimes there's legislation that could really prevent things from happening that don't happen until they finally do happen. And I think a really good example of that is a drowning prevention bill that, several members, myself included, had worked on different drowning prevention bills. And finally, a drowning prevention bill was passed this last session. And then there was an elopement bill for kids with autism. We know that kids with autism have a tendency to elope, and there have been groups in the Central Florida area that have been really trying, and actually statewide advocacy groups have been really trying for years to get a bill passed that just was not going anywhere. And for some reason this year it was able to move. So sometimes it's just one of those things where you can't even determine why. In the hindsight, you can see it, such as as I mentioned with the Gage's law, that in hindsight, I see why it passed, because that was something the governor was going to be going around talking about. But there are other times where it's maybe a family member of one of the committee chairs says, hey, I really feel very strongly about this bill, and you should put it on the agenda. There's so many factors at work. So it's kind of hard to determine, but I will say that we keep doing that. I mean, that's one of the things I always point out too, that we file these larger bills like paid parental leave, but I also filed a bill to cap insulin at $35 a month for people with private insurance. So we try to do the bigger things, but then we also try to do the smaller things as well, because we understand that you gotta do more than one thing at a time, and you kind of have that, sort of that mentality. So we walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yeah, and just to underscore, representatives are people just like us. So they are not immune to family members who are like, this is an area I feel strongly about, or their own spheres of influence, they could be persuaded with as well. So it just goes to show why we need even more people to speak up, because you never really know what could come out of that and what initiative, you could be impacting. So thank you for getting those bills, to the finish line. I think it's going to improve people's overall quality of life in so many different ways, and give them those opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have had. Before kind of we start our closing, I would love to just briefly plug HB 1471. It's something that you mentioned in your Substack article, and I've written about it. I believe I published it, the piece on the 7th. Yours was the 17th. of April of this month, and I'll include that in the show notes, the link to that. Could you talk about this? And it passed the House, and so what its future's like as well?
Yes, it passed the House, and I believe it has been signed by the governor, so it will be going into effect. And so HB 1471 is a bill that allows the governor, the cabinet of the governor, and the head of FDLE to designate a domestic terrorist organization. And one of the real issues with that is that, I keep, my hair is on fire about it, because the federal government does not even have a designation for domestic terrorist organizations, because it's really difficult because of our First Amendment is such a core amendment to our Constitution. It's the First Amendment, after all, it's the one that they put at the very top. And so there's that very fine line between freedom of speech and, going after somebody for what they're saying. Now, the federal government has come up with a way to deal with people who take action on some of their thoughts. And so there are domestic terrorist activities charges that can be levied against somebody if they were to take action. But there's still no designation for an organization. And so the fact that a state can do this, and we've seen states previously try to do this. I think it was Arkansas in the 50s tried to classify the NAACP as a domestic terrorist organization. So for a state to do this is really very, very alarming. It also begs the question of who, if they're considered a domestic terrorist organization in Florida, what happens when they cross the border and then go to Georgia or Alabama? Are they no longer? It's also very messy. States shouldn't be handling this. So there's concern that that it could possibly violate the supremacy clause. Definitely concerns about. The fact that it sort of targets one religion. The sponsor has said in podcasts and in other spaces that she doesn't speak very highly of those in the Muslim religion, and it was called the Sharia Act law, or the Sharia ban, which is not something that happens in the United States. And a lot of religions have canon. I thought it was really interesting, and I heard it in committee, and the Catholic bishops came to speak against this bill, because anybody who is raised Catholic, I was raised Catholic, the Catholic religion has its canon of its own. They have rules and laws that apply to the church. They're not legal laws, but they are the laws that those who follow the religion can choose to follow. So there are a lot of religions that have these sort of laws or a canon, and so it's very specifically going after one specific religion. And then, of course, there's the issue at due process, because at the end of the day, you're not accused of being a part of a domestic terrorist organization. You are labeled as such, and you are told after you have been labeled, and then on the back end you have to fight it. And the original bill didn't even tell you if you were designated. The original bill, you had to constantly check on a website.
Yes.
As it was passed, there's a time frame for them to let you know. But in this country, you are innocent till proven guilty, not the other way around. And with this bill, it really is you're guilty, now prove that you're innocent. So there's a lot of issues with it. And the concentration of power is just something that, it's just something that we shouldn't be doing this in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely has Bill of Rights, issues and questions that I would be curious to see too, if this perhaps doesn't make its way up the court system, as we start, considering what happens when you cross state lines and things like that. So, and also, it is targeted by, intentionally for one religion, but it really does open up and creates this gray area for, I know a lot of people in advocacy positions, and you came from that world. A lot of individuals, myself included, are concerned that this could create precedent to, go after advocacy organizations that are perhaps working to get certain amendments overturned or things like that. Who gets to decide that, which group is a terrorist organization and who doesn't, and who qualifies as one and what doesn't? It really is confusing on purpose.
Right.
So I'm incredibly grateful for you highlighting that, and definitely want to stay tuned for, how that plays out, if there's going to be any specific like cases that go up against that. Um, to wrap this up, I really do want to platform and give you time to just briefly speak about, you filed for the Democrat primary on August 18th ahead of the November 3rd general election. Can you speak a little about what motivated you to run again?
Yeah, absolutely. I will tell you, I first ran, as I said, because of the attack on reproductive health care, but I continue to run because I love this community so much with all my heart. I have lived here since 2002. I'm originally from Queens, New York, and they call Queens, New York the borough of nations because it is one of the most diverse places in the country, not just in New York, but in the entire country. And that is sort of what my district feels like. It is an incredibly diverse district where so many people come here from all over the country and all over the world to, own their little piece of the American dream and, create a community where their children can thrive, where they can be successful. And they really deserve to have somebody that's going to go up there and represent them. And they also deserve to have somebody that's going to answer their emails, get back to them on the everyday constituent issues that a lot of people deal with. And I will tell you, those are the at the end of the day, those are my favorite things. When someone reaches out and we're able to help them with a problem, it really makes you feel like this is worth it. It can be incredibly hard and daunting at times, but it's really worth it when you're able to help somebody navigate something that feels very complicated and overwhelming to them. So I will continue to do this as long as they'll have me, or until I term out. I really do love the work, and I love people, and I know right now we're in a time where people are really worried and scared, but I am a hopeless optimist, and always do believe in the power of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I genuinely appreciate you highlighting how great this state is and the people that make it so. I think it gets overlooked a lot, or that narrative is not always what makes it to the headlines. But I couldn't agree more. And I love how great that dovetailed right into the question I ask all my guests, which is, understanding that you are the super minority and you're putting bills that maybe won't make it out of subcommittee or committee. What keeps you going? You speak about the people that you get to help support, like, getting Gage's law, giving peace to that mom who is able to know that something came out of her situation. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention about, what keeps you going? What's your why?
Yeah, just being able to help people when they need it, and just just being here for this amazing community and showing this community who's given me so much love, being able to give love back to them. And all of us being here together, it really makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah, yeah. Orlando and District 44 is a really special place for sure. So, Representative Harris, thank you so much. This is exactly the kind of conversation that Southern Voices exists to have, and I'm grateful that you made time for it. For listeners and those watching the recording, the show notes with links to bills, how to get involved. I'm also going to include a link to check, your voter registration. Make sure that you're ready when it comes to primary season, and then as well as Representative Harris's Substack. Any resources on the special session as well. If this conversation was useful, please share it. Please share it with someone you know. If you know someone in Florida, I would appreciate that. And the work, these conversations do depend on communities that carry them forward. So thank you so much for your time today. I genuinely appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate this. This was great.
Wonderful. All right, let's talk soon.
Bye.